So what is going on, guys? Welcome back to yet another video here on the Freak Flyers YouTube channel. And today we are continuing the swoop accessories mini series, where it's a two-part series where I talk about swooping related accessories. On the previous video we talked about swoop accessories on your rig, so extras and whatnot and options you get on the rig related to swooping and what they do, what you should get. This time we're going to talk about separate accessories that are completely removed from swooping, not completely removed from the rig, sorry, and they're still related to swooping. So things that might not even have a lot to do with skydiving, but they're still pretty useful for swooping, and you'll see why. So again, remember, guys, this doesn't include canopies and stuff on the rig we talked about on the previous video. This just includes really accessories, things that are everything around swooping that's not like the main rig and canopy and helmet, all the AAD, Cypress or whatever. Really the accessories, not the main components. So without further ado, let's get started. Again, remember, these are in no particular order. So number one, canopy bags. Now, when you're swooping, most of the times you'll have this habit of collecting canopies, where you'll start to get one canopy for this, one for that, one for the whatever. And soon you realize you have more canopies than you have jumps. No, this is not true, but you understand what I mean. So when you're traveling with canopies and when you're storing them, hopefully you're storing them unpacked and as loose as possible. So they're not in tension, they're not folded, they're not packed or whatever. But when you're traveling, you do need to travel with a canopy. So if you're just starting out, usually you'll have one canopy, okay, so your normal canopy, and then you might get a larger or a smaller canopy depending on the type of canopy you already have, so to be able to do the other disciplines. So depending on your weight, your flying style, depends on a lot of factors, but usually if you have two canopies, you'll have a small canopy and a bigger canopy, and they might be the same. Usually they're the same, they might be different, I don't know, but this is usually what you will have. So for instance, let's say my case, I have a Petra 59 for speed, only for speed, and I have a Petra 66.6 I use for zone accuracy, and I use for distance. Now I have other Petras, but we'll get to that in a minute. But for the case of a person that has only two Petras, when you're training, usually your Petra will not stay packed for more than a single day. And when you're competing and when you're training for a competition in the venue, you won't be there for long. Like, you'll be there for a week before maximum, unless you're super mega rich, but usually you'll arrive 1 week before. So you'll train speed you'll train the discipline that you have your other canopy for either every day or at least every other day. And if you're not training, you should train a little bit more, but that's basically when you're training it. So what this means is it's okay to leave the canopy packed. If you're leaving it for 24 hours, maybe a little bit more, it's completely fine to leave it packed. So for this, I would recommend a canopy bag. Now, these canopy bags, they're specific, and they have, of course, they have drawbacks and they have an advantage. So the advantage with having a canopy bag is that it's way, way, way faster. When I mean way faster, it's like it doesn't even take you almost any extra time to switch canopies. So for instance, let's say you're jumping back to back and you're jumping 1, 2, 3, 4, you're doing 10 jumps a day, and halfway through the day you're not even stopping every time you land you manifest, and then you wait 30 minutes and you go again. You arrive, you manifest yourself, and you're in a 30-minute call, and if you decide you want to jump speed and you need to change canopies, you can do it in 2 minutes more than it takes you to pack a normal canopy. Why? Because you pack it until it's in the bag and all the lines are stowed. You just open the bag, put it next to your canopy, switch the risers. So one of the risers on the bag go on the container, the risers on the container go on the bag. Then you finish up the container, you close the bag, and you're ready to go. This is the advantages of it. Now, the disadvantage of the canopy bags are you need to have two deployment systems and 2 pairs of risers. Now, again, if you're sponsored or whatever, you're going to have this already. Sunpath was kind enough to send me whatever. I needed 2 pairs of risers, 2 pairs of D-bags, whatever. So, and I had D-bags and risers laying around. I have them in all sorts of sizes for whatever purposes I need. So this is fine. And usually you'll even use, maybe you'll use different size risers for different disciplines, depending on how much you set on the harness or how your body position is, whatever. So this is fine for most people. But the downside that's going to apply to everyone is that the canopy does need to be let packed over whatever period you're not jumping that canopy. So for instance, let's say you're not going to be jumping, which can happen. For instance, let's say you're in a competition and you train until, let's say, a Wednesday you train speed, and the canopy starts and the competition starts on Thursday and goes up until Sunday. So let's say you finish up training on Wednesday, and then Thursday the competition starts, and Thursday maybe it's bad weather so you don't jump. Then you move on to Friday, you start jumping distance, and then the weather is bad so you move on to Saturday, you jump zone accuracy, and then finally on Sunday you jump speed. Now what can happen is the canopy can stay packed from let's say Wednesday to Sunday, which is already pretty long time, and you're in the middle of a competition. You got a lot of stuff to think about. You don't want to be unpacking your canopy and then packing it again, which can be like pretty boring. So what this means is your canopy is going to be packed. Now it's going to have two downsides. The first downside, of course, it's going to create the fabric might set. It's going to start creating folds on the fabric, and it's going to wear it out prematurely. It's going to make it not fly as good. Again, I don't want to say this so that people start thinking the canopy is going to fly like shit, but it can have some effect. And then the bag starts to set, the fabric starts to set, and when you have that first opening, it might be a little bit funky. Again, it's going to have a lot to do with the way you pack and whatnot, but it is a downside. To combat this downside, we have something pretty cool that you can use, which is these vacuum bags. Now, when I fold my canopies, I do this special fold, which is pretty similar to how NZR Sports ships it to us, which is basically you fold it in the stitch lines of the canopy, because the stitch lines of the canopy, they're already folds. You're not going to fold them more than they're already folded. So it's better to store the canopy folded in places where it's already folded. And then the places where it's not folded, you do the minimum folds, which are the sideways folds along the length of the width of the canopy. Now these vacuum bags, they create the same shape you use to store the canopy away, but they compress it down to remove all the air and make it a little bit smaller for you to travel. So if you have more than two canopies, you're not going to be maybe jumping one of the canopies for 2 or 3 days, and you know you're not gonna. So you can travel this way, and this is how I travel when I travel with maybe a freestyle wing or an intermediate size wing like my 62, which I brought here. I brought it packed like that. It's pretty useful for that. The only downside is that it is creating like pretty aggressive kinks on the canopy. It's really kinking, like making it really folding it really tightly again, which is kind of a downside, but it's not a huge deal. And if you're jumping it back to back, you can, of course. And also this has another downside, which is you don't need anything really. If you're assembling soft links before you jump, you don't need anything. But realistically, you're going to need a pair of risers, and you can share the D bag because the canopy is unpacked. So you can just jump a canopy, leave it open, assemble the RDS slather on the other canopy, and pack it like that. So it is a little bit slower, maybe it's even the same time. It's not really super faster, but it is a different way of doing it. So yeah, let's move on to number 2. Now, number 2 is a GPS tracker. Now, a lot of people use GPS trackers. I have one. I'm sponsored by FlySide. They gave me full of GPS trackers and whatnot. I don't really use them. I should use them more, but they are useful for seeing your speed times and your distance runs and whatever, especially if you have the pond file and you have the G-Swoop software. I find them really useful for measuring your descent speed, so your vertical speed. If you're trying out maybe a different technique, a different turn, a bigger turn, and you want to compare the speed you're getting, because again, swooping is based on the speed you're generating, vertical speed, and then of course translates to horizontal speed, but you need a vertical speed first. And it is pretty useful if you're doing a little bit of a different body position technique or a different turn. It's useful to see how much speed you're actually gaining, how much your turn is actually moving during the recovery arc because of the wind, or how much you're actually moving through the turn because of the wind. It is useful to see that because you can see all the trajectories you're doing. So a GPS tracker is pretty useful, and we usually attach it to the back of our helmets. Now, number 3, we have cameras. Cameras are really important because they make you be able to debrief yourself. There comes to a point where you know where you want in swooping, you know what you need to do to get good scores, and a camera will help you debrief yourself. Now, I recommend 2 types of cameras. One, a 360 camera. 360 camera attached to the top of your head is going to be able to film what's in front of you, what's behind you, what's on top of you, and your body, a little bit of it. And it's pretty useful for you to debrief yourself. You can see your trajectory really well, where you're going, so point of view video. And you can at the same time look back and see if you dragged water, if you're skipping under the zone accuracy water drags, what's working best, like the first skip, what's digging your foot in good, or what's making it skip up. You can kind of see if you got the gates in speed, kind of again, because it's from the top view, so it's pretty hard to judge, but you can kind of see if you got it or not. But it's really useful, and you can see the canopy if it's fluttering or whatever from two short lines. Anything really, you can see with a 360 camera. It's pretty useful and does pretty cool videos. And the second, and I think it's even better than the 360 camera, it's the outside camera. Now, if you're swooping, if you're competing, if you're in a serious swooping level, you might even be coaching other people. So the ground camera, buying like a Sony AX53, so it's one of these cameras that have a nice stabilizer and they have a lot of zoom. It's going to be able to film your body position even in the beginning of the turn. It's going to be able to film your turn nice and slow, or your snap nice and hard, whatever. It's going to be able to film everything from a wider, from a close-up perspective. So I do recommend it, and if you're coaching, you'll see that the ground camera is going to pay for itself pretty fast. If you're known to be the coach that has a nice quality camera, people love the pics for the gram. And if you're known to be the shitty camera swoop coach, you might not get as much clients. So get a good camera. I have an AX53 and I can't recommend it enough. It's done a lot of canopy courses. It's done a lot of filming for competitions and all that. So I do recommend it. I used to have a DSLR with a zoom lens, and I don't recommend it. Even with it's not the same as the AX53 is perfect for the ground camera for swooping. Number 3, it's a weight belt with a cutaway, hopefully. Now, weight belts, they're used for swooping all the time. There's thousands of different weight belts. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is the way you put it on and if it's comfortable or not. And, of course, it being within the limits for weight. So check the 5 Canopy piloting rules for the weight limits for weight belts. And I recommend using a weight belt that's pretty thin. I prefer a weight belt that's tall and thin because it's going to affect less the thickness of your rig and all that than one of those short, thin, where the width, like the height of it, is actually smaller, but it's pretty fat. I prefer mine. I designed it myself. It looks pretty tall. It isn't super tall, but it is thin. So that's pretty good. And it can hold the 15.9 kilos, so it can hold the whole thing. And I also recommend you doing it with two pouches if you're doing it tall like me, because if you do it with one pouch, it's going to be like a pretty fat pouch. So do it with 2 pouches, is going to make you be able to regulate the thickness of it pretty well. And also try to make it as small as possible. Again, you don't need to make it super wide. And if the pouches fit in there super loose, you're not doing your job correctly. Mine, if you look at it, the pouches are super tight in there. And that's pretty much what you want, and that's what I have. And of course, the way you attach is really, really important. You need to have straps attached like to the actual fabric. Like I use Cordura to make the pouches, to make the place where the pouches fit actually. So one piece of Cordura, and there's webbing. I think type 14. I don't remember the type of this. I think it's type 14. There's two straps of type 14 webbing that go all across, and they're stitched in multiple places to the actual weight belt. And then in the ends, I have Cobra Clips. They're military spec Cobra Clips, which is what you want. You don't want to use cheap plastic clips, because if you're doing a turn and they break or they come undone, this thing is going to slide out of you, going to go flying, it's going to kill someone. So you do not want that to happen. You can even use you want something that's pretty fast to attach, because you want to put the weight belt on and don't want to be fiddling with like buckles or whatever. So you want something that clips in, but you want something good. So I recommend Cobra Clips. It's what I use. I use 2 of them, just because one of them would hold up perfectly fine, but it would make the weight belt kind of weird, where it would be pulling it from one point only. So pulling it from 2 points makes it perfect. I think a lot of people use a Cobra Clip. You can even use maybe one thick one if you're doing a little bit of a smaller weight belt, and it's going to be perfectly fine. Now, the clips, if it's a smaller enough weight belt and if it's a large enough clip, you can use it. I've used plastic clips and they did break, so that's why I stopped using them and I use Cobra Clips now. And cutaway, of course, it's not mandatory, but I do recommend you having it, especially if you're jumping around water. And I have this one where mine can be converted to have a cutaway or not have a cutaway. And as you can see here in the video, it does have a cutaway and it does work. So next up, numero 5, we have all sorts of protections. So I put a butt pad and ankle braces, whatever, in different places, but I'm going to consider the butt pad and the ankle braces and the shoes to be one, so the protection things. And I do recommend you use them all the time. Doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're doing freestyle, whatever, accuracy, speed. But this is more used for distance and accuracy. I think if I have to skip, I skip on the speed to use the braces. But the butt pad, which is the first one here, I do use it only for distance and for speed. I don't use it for zone accuracy. Now, the butt pad is basically really, really simple. It's nothing super like safety protection thing. You can use the snowboard ones. I believe people use the snowboard butt pads, but I use one that I made myself. It's just 2 pieces of cordura, and they have this triangle sort of shape that makes it fit nicely on your hip bone and in between your legs. So this is just a piece of cardboard, and then it has foam on one side, foam on the other side, and then cordura wrapping around it. It's super simple. You can't go wrong with it, and it works. The foam keeps it rigid, and it makes so that nothing like actually like protrudes into your butt, and then the foam just makes it all compress a little bit and give you a nice padding on your butt. So I recommend butt pad. You can make it yourself. Pretty simple. You can even make it with tape if you're not into doing it with like stitching and all that. You can make it with tape. Just a piece of cardboard, 2 pieces of foam, and then some tape around it, and you'll be good to go. Now, the ankle braces, I do recommend you getting in from an ankle brace specific place, because they're going to be bracing it you the correct way. These ones I got at a physiotherapy shop after I broke my ankle. Of course, I got the ankle braces, and I got 2 of them, and I use them. Some of them I see people, they have like a cable and wheel system where you turn the wheel and it tightens cables around your ankle. I do find that one to be a little bit better, and it's faster. The only downside to mine is that it uses actual like laces and then straps around the laces. So it does mean that putting putting your socks on, and then putting your ankle brace on, tightening the laces, then putting the strap over the laces, then putting the shoe over everything. It does mean that I'm taking like fucking 10 minutes or whatever to get ready, which is pretty ridiculous, especially if you're in a rush in the morning to get ready to go on the first load. But it does work well for what it is. And then, of course, you've got to use the leg straps all day. So what I see people using sometimes is these cable ones, where you tighten a wheel, you spin a wheel, and it tightens the cables. And then if you want to release, you press on the wheel, I think, and it releases the cable. So it's nice if you got like a 1-hour call, you release the cables and you're walking comfortably. And then if you want to jump, just tighten the cables. You can even do it on the plane. So I do recommend those ones if you can find them. But mine's, I'm not going to link anything. You can just find them, search for it. And then shoes, of course, high top, flat bottom, not much to say about it. I use Vans, high top Vans, they have flat bottom. Don't buy shoes with crappy bottoms, and don't buy super like thin shoes, like running shoes or whatever, because they're going to mean you're not going to have as much support on the high top support on your ankles. Also, thin shoes, if you run into a rock or whatever, it's going to hurt. So don't get that. Also, if you got thin shoes and you hit the edge of the pond, which has happened to me training the downwind, what you call it, when we were doing the full drag of the pond for the distance, so the drag distance for the Alabama Championships, for Dubai actually, for the IPC6, I hit my toe on the edge of the pond, and it hurts if you're going super fast. So get something that has, I'm not going to say reinforced toes, no, because that's just overkill, but something that's actually solid and has thickness to it, with flat bottoms that slide easily on the grass. You don't want anything that gets caught on anything, because if you put your foot into a hole and it gets caught on the hole, you're going to break your foot or twist your ankle. So something that's nice and flat on the sole and has high top is what I recommend. Moving on, a jackknife, not a jinky knife, not a shitty ass knife. I'm talking about a jackknife. Swooping has thin lines. They get caught on stuff. They get wrapped around stuff, and they're pretty hard to get off. So a jackknife is in order if you want to survive. And for those of you who have had wraps, I've never had a wrap, fortunately, but I know people who have had ugly wraps. And I'm talking about a real jackknife, none of them small-ass knives, a real jackknife. Moving on, swoop pants. Swoop pants are a gimmick. Are they really? I don't think so. I think they're pretty, good at what they're designed for. They reinforce the knees for you to kneel on the plane, and they reinforce the butt for you to land on your butt. Some of them even have tailbone protectors, which again the butt pad is better at it. And again, swoop pads with reinforced butt. Now, when I mean reinforced butt, is cordura on the butt, and if you're serious about competing and you're going to be landing on your ass after a real distance or speed run, you're going to want actual reinforcement. Now, you can ask for double cordura, but cordura is going to be destroyed either way. So what I do is I put webbing, type 8 webbing on my bottom, and this webbing it takes a while for it to get destroyed. So webbing is what I recommend. It's what I've been using. What I do is I'll sketch up the shape of the butt of the cordura on the butt of the pants, and I'll cut a piece of cordura that size, and then I'll stitch webbing in it, and it seems to work. Sometimes what happens is the line that's attaching the webbing to the cordura gets cut because you're sliding, and the cordura gets the webbing gets loose. So I recommend putting a bunch of lines so that it really does dig in, and have the line tight so that the lines get sucked into the webbing and they're not exposed as much. So top tip there. Moving on to number 8. So it's still on the swoop pants, but it's a little bit different, which is an RDS pocket. This RDS pocket is again what you use to store your RDS. And there's a bunch of different options, not that many, but they're still different. So first option is the swoop pants with RDS pocket. This is by far the most common one. The only downside to it is sometimes you got two ways of having it. So you can either have it easy to put the RDS pocket in, but it's exposed next to your leg and creates drag on one side and it creates uneven drag. And then you have the ones hidden under your leg, but sometimes they get covered by the leg strap. Now I have the one that's hidden under my leg. It is harder to put in sometimes, depends on how you open. It can be tricky because the leg strap covers the hole. So you gotta open the hole, like put your hand in the pocket, stretch the pocket, and then you gotta put the RDS in, which is pretty crappy, but it's a way of doing it, and it's not that bad. But it's how I do it. And then you got the ones where they're on your side, so they're never covered by the leg strap, but they do create like a ball on your side. And I have used this, and what happened is I didn't feel the air resistance actually turning. If you just subconsciously correct for it, but it is there, extra air resistance. But when I was doing, because it's on the right side, when I was doing a speed run, the ball that the RDS pocket creates actually hit the buoy, and I didn't even notice. And the buoy that wasn't kicked down, of course, but it was moving. So they were like, "Oh, you touched the buoy," and I didn't even notice. I've never touched the buoy in my life, and I never feel. That was the only time I didn't even feel it. But the little pocket did touch the buoy because you're going so close to the buoy to make the perfect line that I did touch it. So there's that. The other option, some manufacturers are making like belly band attached RDS pockets, and they're pretty nice because they don't really create any extra drag. You're already, your body's already dragging anyway, so might as well put the pocket in there. It only creates a little bit of extra drag when you're leaning forward, but you're going slow enough when you're leaning forward that it's not going to be too bad that it's creating extra drag. So it's not, it's not a big deal. And I do really, really like it. I did use it for maybe 2 or 3 comps. I stopped using it because it's just always like moving around in the belly band if it's not well attached. And I preferred putting it on the pocket. Just makes for better pictures, neater pictures where you're not covering any logos. Just looks weird when you have like those balls in there. So, I stopped using it, but they're both valid ways of storing your RDS. And lastly, your altimeter. Now, of course, you're using an altimeter. You're like, what the fuck? But I'm talking about an altimeter where you can actually look at it when you're canopy piloting. Now, if you're canopy piloting, you're going to be looking at the ground a lot. You're going to be looking at other canopies a lot. You're probably not going to be looking at your wrist a lot because your wrist is holding onto your risers. So what I still do is I have the altimeter attached to my knee because it's second nature to be when you're looking down. Just to glance at the altimeter on your knee is really, really fast. Especially for me, where I sit a lot on the harness, like I really sit back. So that's why where I usually have the altimeter attached is in my close to my knee. Now, recently, because I was trying out a little bit of a different position where my knees would be like back a little bit, I started to attach my my altimeter to my chest strap. Now, this has 2 benefits. The benefit is, number 1, that even if you're standing up on the harness, like you're basically where you're not sitting back, you're standing up, you can still see the altimeter. And this is basically why I started using it that way, because I was doing a position where I was actually standing up on the harness all the time and not like sitting back. And I could still see the altimeter there on the chest strap. The other advantage, and this is probably like the biggest one, is that you can have your altimeter with you all the time if you have it attached to your rig and it's your only rig. Or in my case, I have 2 rigs and I have 2 altimeters, because I cannot tell you how many times I changed suits really quickly and then I figured out I didn't have an altimeter because the altimeter was on the soup pants and it wasn't with me. And it's pretty annoying to be boarding without an altimeter. Even though you have an audible, it's not a big deal, but it's still a bad example to not jump with an altimeter. So basically now having it on the rig, I always have an altimeter with me. And if you're free falling and you really need to look at the altimeter, looking at the chest strap is basically possible. Where looking at the knee, if you're arching, if you're with an AFF student, looking at your knee is not going to be feasible. You're not going to do it. So that's why I started using there. I can use it in free fall a lot more. And it's just a lot better to always have an altimeter with you on the rig rather than being on some random pants that maybe you're not even using that day. So also, the little tip for the audible altimeter is to have it on soup guide mode, sorry. I think everybody's using it, so you might be using it already, which is the ones that go beep, 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 beep. Instead of just going like rings 3 times, it rings like for warning you're getting close. So guys, those are the accessories. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, remember to subscribe, like, whatever, and comment any other accessories you remember. If you have any questions or complimentary information, you can add them in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time.